The old farmhouse sat alone at the edge of a dirt road, surrounded by open fields and weathered wooden fences that had stood longer than most people in the county. The paint on the house had long since faded to a dull gray, and the barn leaned slightly to the left, held together by stubborn beams and years of careful repair. It wasn't much to look at, but it was solid, honest, built to last. Inside, the man who owned it moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who had learned long ago that rushing only led to mistakes. His name was Henry Callahan. At 71 years old, Henry was a war veteran, though few people in town still remembered the details. Korea, infantry, winter campaigns that froze men to their bones and memories into their minds forever. He had survived things that never truly let go of him, even decades later. He lived alone now. His wife had passed 12 years earlier. His only son had moved west and stopped calling sometime after that. The farm remained, not because it was profitable, but because it was familiar, because it asked nothing of him except work, and work was something Henry understood. That afternoon, Henry was in the barn, repairing a loose hinge on one of the stalls. The rhythmic sound of metal against wood echoed softly as he worked. Outside, the wind rolled gently across the fields, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Fast. Uneven. Panicked. Henry froze. His hand tightened instinctively around the hammer as he turned toward the open barn door. Visitors were rare. Neighbors even rarer. No one came down this road unless they had a reason. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then a small figure appeared in the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her hair was tangled and matted with dust. One of her shoes was missing, the other barely clinging to her foot. Her dress was torn at the hem, streaked with dirt, and her chest rose and fell in short, frantic breaths. Her face was red and blotchy from crying, tears still spilling down her cheeks as she looked around wildly, like a trapped animal searching for escape. When her eyes landed on Henry, something in her expression shifted. Hope. She ran to him without hesitation. Her small hands grabbed the front of his jacket, clutching the fabric as if letting go might cause the ground beneath her to disappear. "They're tearing down our house," she cried, her voice breaking on every word. "Please, they're breaking it. They won't stop." The words hit Henry like a physical blow. He stared down at her, his mind struggling to process the sudden intrusion of fear, urgency, and innocence into his quiet world. For a moment the barn seemed to fade away, replaced by the distant echo of artillery fire and shouting voices from another lifetime. He knelt slowly so they were at eye level. "Easy," he said, his voice low and steady, though something tight had formed in his chest. "You're safe here, take a breath." The girl shook her head violently. "They're breaking the walls," she sobbed. "They took a big machine. My mama told me to run. She said to find help." Henry studied her face. The fear was real, raw, the kind that couldn't be faked. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily," she whispered. "Where's your home, Emily?" She pointed back toward the dirt road, toward the tree line beyond the fields. "Down there, by the old water tower." Henry's jaw tightened. He knew that area, and he knew what had been happening there lately. Slowly, carefully, he helped Emily to her feet. "You did the right thing," he said. "You hear me?" She nodded, though her hands still trembled. Henry grabbed his jacket from a hook by the barn door and reached for the keys hanging beside it. The old pickup truck roared to life after a second turn of the ignition, its engine loud in the quiet countryside. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, pulling her knees up to her chest. Henry didn't ask any more questions as he drove. The road stretched ahead, winding through fields and patches of trees. As they approached the water tower, Henry could see dust rising into the air. Then he saw the machine. A bulldozer. Bright yellow. Brand new. And beyond it, a small house. Or what was left of it. One side of the structure had already been torn open. Wooden beams snapped and scattered like broken bones. The sound of grinding metal and splintering wood filled the air as the machine lurched forward again, slamming into the side of the house. Emily cried out. "That's my room," she said. "That's where my bed was." Henry slammed on the brakes. He stepped out of the truck, every muscle in his body coiling tight. His eyes scanned the scene quickly, the way they always had when danger was near. 3 men stood nearby, wearing hard hats and reflective vests. Another leaned casually against a pickup truck, sipping from a coffee cup like this was just another routine job. A woman stood a short distance away, screaming. She was in her 30s, maybe early 40s. Her hair was pulled back messily, her clothes covered in dust and debris. She beat her fists against the side of the bulldozer, shouting for it to stop, though the operator didn't even look at her. Henry knew that look on her face. Helplessness. He walked toward them. The men noticed him almost immediately. "Hey!" one of them shouted. "You can't be here. This is a work site." Henry didn't slow down. "Turn it off," he said calmly. The man laughed. "Buddy, we got permits. You don't like it, talk to the county." Henry stopped a few feet away. "That's a family's home," he said, "and there's a child involved." Another man scoffed. "Not anymore. Property's been seized. Orders came down this morning." The woman saw Henry then. Her eyes widened and she rushed toward him. "Please," she said desperately. "They said we had to leave today. I tried to stop them. My daughter—" "She's safe," Henry said, cutting her off gently. "She's in my truck." The woman collapsed against him, sobbing. Henry looked back at the men. "Who gave the order?" he asked. "Doesn't matter," one of them replied. "We're just doing our job." Henry nodded slowly. He had heard those words before. He had heard them shouted across battlefields, spoken in courtrooms, whispered by men who thought responsibility could be buried beneath procedure. He turned back toward his truck. Emily watched through the windshield, her small hands pressed against the glass. Henry met her eyes. Then he turned back to the bulldozer. "Shut it down," he said again. The man on the machine hesitated this time. "Last warning," another worker snapped. Henry reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang once, then twice. A voice answered. "This is Callahan." Henry took a slow breath. "This is Henry Callahan," he said. "I need a favor." There was a pause. Then the voice changed. "Henry, is that really you?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "What's going on?" Henry looked at the broken house, the crying woman, the frightened child watching from the truck. "They're tearing down a family's home," he said, "and they shouldn't be." Silence. Then quietly, "Send me the address." Henry ended the call. The men laughed again, though their confidence sounded thinner now. "Who you calling, old man?" one of them sneered. "Ghostbusters?" Henry didn't answer. He simply stood there, waiting, and for the first time that afternoon the bulldozer stopped moving. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound of the bulldozer ever had. The machine sat idle, its engine still rumbling softly, as if uncertain whether it was allowed to breathe. Dust hung in the air, drifting slowly back to the ground. One of the workers shifted his weight, glancing at the others, then back at Henry. The woman stood frozen beside him, her hands trembling as she wiped tears from her face. She didn't dare hope yet. Hope had already failed her once today. Emily watched from the truck, her face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. A minute passed, then another. Henry remained still, his posture relaxed but unmoving, like a man who had learned long ago that patience could be a weapon. He had stood this way before, waiting for orders, waiting for explosions, waiting for men on the other side of a line to make the first mistake. Finally, one of the workers broke the silence. "Look," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "We've got a schedule. County signed off. If you've got a problem—" The man's phone rang. He frowned, pulled it from his pocket, and answered. "What?" he said sharply. Henry watched as the color drained from the man's face. "Yes, sir," the worker muttered, suddenly stiff. "I understand. Right away." He hung up and stared at the screen for a long moment, as if hoping it would tell him this was some kind of mistake. "Who was that?" another worker asked. The man swallowed. "The county supervisor." A third worker scoffed nervously. "What did he want?" The first man didn't answer immediately. He looked at Henry, really looked at him this time. Not just an old farmer in a worn jacket, but something else. Something harder to define. "He said to shut everything down," the man finally said. Immediately, the others stared at him. "That doesn't make sense," one protested. "We've got the paperwork." "Doesn't matter," the man snapped. "He said there's been an error. We're to stand by until further notice." The woman let out a sharp gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Emily's door flew open as she jumped down from the truck and ran toward her mother. "Mama!" The woman dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her like she was afraid the ground might swallow her if she let go. Henry turned away from them and walked a few steps toward the edge of the property. He stared out at the fields, giving them privacy, even as his mind drifted backward in time. He hadn't planned to get involved today. That was the truth. For years, Henry Callahan had kept his distance from other people's problems. He had learned the hard way that once you stepped in, there was no easy way back out. Lives tangled, expectations formed, promises were made, and promises were dangerous, especially when you'd already broken too many in your lifetime. The sound of boots crunching on gravel pulled him back. The woman approached cautiously, Emily still clinging to her side. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice unsteady. "They said the house was condemned, that we had no rights. I didn't know what to do." Henry studied her face. She was exhausted, not just from today, but from years of fighting battles no one saw. He recognized that look too. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied. "Sarah Miller." He nodded. "How long you lived here?" 6 years, she said. "My husband built most of it himself. He passed 2 years ago." Henry's jaw tightened. "County ever send notices before today?" She shook her head. "Nothing. No letters. No warnings. They just showed up this morning with machines." Henry exhaled slowly. That told him everything he needed to know. "Pack a bag," he said. Sarah blinked. "What?" "Just in case," Henry added. "I don't trust standby." She hesitated. "Where would we go?" Henry glanced toward the farmhouse in the distance. "You can stay with me tonight." Sarah's eyes widened. "I can't impose." "It's not an imposition," he said firmly. "It's a precaution." Emily looked up at him. "You live there?" she asked softly. "Yes." "Is it big?" Henry almost smiled. "Big enough." Within minutes, the workers had climbed back into their vehicles. The bulldozer was shut down, its metal arm resting awkwardly against the torn side of the house, like a beast frozen mid-attack. Henry watched them leave, but he didn't relax. Not yet. He had seen too many situations reverse themselves once the sun went down. That night the farmhouse felt different, louder. Emily sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs as she traced patterns into the worn wood with her fingertip. Sarah hovered nearby, offering to help with dinner, though Henry waved her off. "I've got it," he said. He made a simple meal: soup, bread, the kind of food that didn't ask questions. Emily ate quietly, though her eyes wandered constantly, taking in every detail. The old clock on the wall, the faded photographs, the medals displayed inside a glass frame above the fireplace. "What are those?" she asked, pointing. Henry followed her gaze. "From the war," he said. "Were you scared?" Emily asked. Henry paused. "Yes," he said honestly. She nodded, satisfied. After dinner, Sarah tucked Emily into the spare bedroom. The girl fell asleep quickly, exhaustion pulling her under like a tide. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there," she said quietly. Henry leaned against the hallway wall. "Sometimes," he replied, "help shows up when you least expect it." Sarah hesitated. "Who did you call today?" Henry didn't answer right away. "A man I served with," he finally said. "He owes me." That wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough. Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Henry sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Henry Callahan," he said. The voice on the other end was low, controlled. "They're not going to stop," the man said. "Whoever ordered that demolition didn't do it by accident." Henry closed his eyes. "I figured," he said. "You made yourself visible today," the voice continued. "That tends to attract attention." Henry stared at the medals on the wall. "I've never been invisible," he replied. A pause. "They'll try again," the man said. "Quietly, legally, or not." Henry nodded, though the man couldn't see it. "Then I'll be ready." The call ended. Henry sat there for a long time after that, listening to the ticking of the clock. For years, he had believed his battles were behind him. But as he looked down the dark hallway toward the room where a little girl slept peacefully for the first time that day, he realized something unsettling. Some wars don't end. They just wait. Sometime after midnight, Henry woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside, not the soft shuffle of a raccoon near the trash, not the wind nudging the porch steps. This was heavier, deliberate. He lay still in bed, eyes open, listening. A vehicle door closed, then another. Henry's hand moved slowly to the nightstand drawer, where an old flashlight rested beside a small radio. He didn't reach for the gun he used to keep there. He hadn't touched one in years, not since the day he decided he was done being that man. But he did reach for the flashlight. He slipped out of bed, boots on in seconds, moving through the house with the quiet discipline of someone who had spent long nights listening for enemies he couldn't see. He stopped at the hallway. Sarah's door was shut. Emily's door, too. Good. He reached the kitchen window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. 2 headlights sat at the edge of his property, pointed directly at the house like eyes. A dark SUV, and behind it, a pickup truck with no markings. 4 silhouettes moved in the beam of the headlights. Henry watched their posture, their spacing, the way they moved like men who weren't here to ask questions. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message. "Don't open the door." Henry stared at it. Then outside, the porch light snapped on, flickering once before staying steady. Someone had flipped the switch, which meant someone was already on his porch. A knock followed. Slow. Confident. Henry didn't move. Another knock, then a voice raised just enough to carry through the door. "Mr. Callahan," the man called. "We need to speak with you." Henry's jaw tightened. He didn't like how they said his name, like they'd rehearsed it. "You've got the wrong house," Henry called back, his voice calm. A pause. Then the voice again, slightly amused. "No, sir. We don't." Henry stayed where he was, behind the wall, out of sight from the windows. "What do you want?" he asked. "We're here about the Miller property," the man said. "There's been confusion. We'd like to clear it up." Henry almost laughed. Confusion didn't show up with 2 vehicles at 1 in the morning. "Come back when the sun's up," Henry said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the voice softened, almost friendly. "Mr. Callahan, it would be in everyone's best interest if you didn't get involved. You had a peaceful life. Let's keep it that way." Henry's eyes narrowed. There it was, the real message. He said nothing. The man sighed. "We're trying to help you. The county made a mistake. It'll be corrected. But if you keep pulling strings, people start asking why." Henry's grip tightened around the flashlight. "You come to my house at night to threaten me?" he asked. The man chuckled lightly. Threaten? No. Of course not. Think of this as advice. From people who don't want to see you inconvenienced. Henry's gaze flicked toward the hallway. Emily. Sarah. He pictured the child's face pressed against the truck window earlier that day, watching her home fall apart. Something old and bitter rose in his chest. You should leave, Henry said, voice low. The porch creaked. The man moved closer to the door, as if he wanted to be heard more clearly. Mr. Callahan, he said, if the Millers stay here, you become part of the situation, and situations come with consequences. Sometimes accidents happen, fires, break-ins, livestock gets loose. A child wanders too far. Henry went cold. In Korea, he had watched men say cruel things with the same casual tone, the kind of cruelty that meant they'd already decided what they were capable of. Henry's voice sharpened, not loud, but edged like steel. Get off my porch. Silence. Then footsteps. Not retreating. Repositioning. Henry realized in that instant that this wasn't just intimidation. This was a test. A push to see how far they could go. The front doorknob rattled. Just once. Like a reminder they could. Henry didn't move. He let the silence hang. He let them feel it. Then, from the hallway behind him, he heard a soft voice. Mr. Callahan? Sarah. Henry turned quickly, holding up a hand. Stay back, he whispered. Sarah stepped into the dim kitchen doorway anyway, her face pale. What's happening? She mouthed. Another knock came, harder this time. Sarah flinched. Henry kept his eyes on her. Take Emily. Go to the pantry, he whispered. There's a door behind the shelves. Basement crawlspace now. Sarah's eyes widened. What? Now, Henry repeated, quietly but firm. Sarah hesitated only a second, then turned and hurried down the hall. Henry stayed at the kitchen window, watching the silhouettes outside shift again. One man moved toward the side of the house. Another stayed at the porch. Henry's phone buzzed again. A second message. They work for Landman, not county. They're private. Henry stared at the words. Landman. He knew that term. Oil. Gas. Developers. People who bought land cheap and sold it expensive, using pressure until the owner broke. But this wasn't oil country. So why here? His phone buzzed once more. They want your land too. Henry's throat tightened. That explained it. The Miller house was the first domino. His farm was the prize. He glanced toward the old framed deed documents in the study. Records his wife had insisted they keep organized. He'd always thought it was pointless. The land was his. Everyone knew it. But now he understood. Someone had been looking at his property on a map and imagining money, and they didn't care who got crushed for it. Outside, the man on the porch spoke again, voice louder now, losing patience. Mr. Callahan, last chance. Open the door and we talk like civilized men. Henry took a slow breath. He didn't open the door. Instead, he walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the old landline receiver, the one he hadn't used in months. He dialed 3 digits, then 4, then another 4, a number not on any public list. He held the receiver to his ear. It rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered, groggy but alert. Callahan? The man said. Henry? Henry spoke quietly, controlled. It's happening, he said. The voice on the other end snapped, fully awake. Where are you? At home. Are you alone? No. A beat. Stay inside, the voice said. Do not open the door. Do you hear me? Henry looked through the window at the silhouettes. I hear you, he replied. How many? The man asked. 4, Henry said. 2 vehicles. Any weapons visible? Not yet. The man exhaled sharply. They're probably carrying. They always are. Henry. The porch voice cut through again, harsher now. Open the door. Henry felt the old part of him, the soldier part, rise up like a shadow. He had buried it for decades, but buried didn't mean gone. Henry spoke into the phone. I'm not opening. Good, the voice said. Listen carefully. Law enforcement is complicated in these situations, but I can get eyes on your property. I can get men there, not police, friends, people who owe me. Henry's grip tightened on the receiver. Do it, he said. The voice lowered. Henry, if this goes bad. Henry cut him off. It already has. The line went dead. Outside, the porch man's patience snapped. The doorknob rattled again, more aggressively, then a loud bang, like a shoulder slamming into wood. Henry stepped back from the window, positioning himself in the dark behind the wall again, where no one could see him. He listened. Another bang. Sarah's muffled voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, calming Emily, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Henry closed his eyes for a single second, and when he opened them, his face was no longer the face of a quiet old farmer. It was the face of a man who had once survived winter combat with nothing but grit and instinct. The banging stopped. Then came quiet. A long, tense quiet. Henry knew that quiet too. It meant a decision was being made. Then, from the porch, the man spoke one last time, voice suddenly calm again. Too calm. All right, he said. We'll do this another way. Footsteps retreated. Gravel crunched as men moved back toward the vehicles. Henry waited. The SUV engine started. The pickup followed. Headlights swung across the farmhouse and then disappeared down the dirt road, leaving darkness behind. Henry didn't relax. Not yet. He walked down the hall and opened the pantry door. He moved aside the shelves just enough to reveal the small hidden latch behind them, an old storm access his wife's father had built decades ago. He opened it. Sarah and Emily were crouched in the narrow space beyond, eyes wide. Emily's cheeks were wet, but she was silent, brave in the way only children could be when they didn't fully understand what they were surviving. Henry crouched down, lowering his voice. They're gone for now, he said. Sarah swallowed hard. Who were they? Henry looked toward the front door, still closed, still standing. People who want what isn't theirs, he said. Emily whispered, trembling. Are they coming back? Henry held her gaze. Yes, he said softly. But next time, we'll be ready. Outside, in the distance, the last sound of engines faded. And Henry Callahan realized something with brutal clarity. He hadn't just offered Sarah and Emily shelter. He had stepped into a fight, a real one, the kind that didn't end with paperwork, the kind that ended with someone losing everything. And Henry wasn't about to let it be them. Before dawn, Henry was already awake. Sleep had come in short, shallow stretches, the kind that left his body rested, but his mind sharp and alert. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at the faint glow creeping along the horizon outside the window. The farmhouse was quiet, too quiet. He listened for the sounds of the night, the wind brushing the siding, the distant bark of a dog, the soft creak of old wood settling. Everything sounded normal, ordinary, which meant nothing. Henry stood and walked to the back porch, scanning the property line. The fields lay still, dew clinging to the grass. No tire tracks, no fresh disturbances. Yet he knew better than to trust the calm. Inside, Sarah stirred. She came down the hallway slowly, careful not to wake Emily, who had finally fallen into a deep sleep just before sunrise. I didn't hear anything else, she said softly. They left, Henry replied, but they didn't give up. Sarah nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. What do they want? Henry didn't sugarcoat it. Land. She frowned. But we don't have anything valuable. The house. Your house was the test, Henry said. Mine is the target. Sarah absorbed that in silence. Why you? Henry looked toward the framed photograph on the mantel, himself in uniform, standing beside men who never made it home. Because I own something outright, he said. No mortgage, no liens, no leverage. That makes it inconvenient for people who prefer shortcuts. Sarah's face tightened. So what happens now? Henry exhaled slowly. Now they try to force a mistake. Legal pressure first, inspectors, notices, claims you never received. And if that doesn't work? Henry's eyes hardened. Then they get uglier. Emily padded into the kitchen barefoot, clutching the stuffed rabbit Henry had found in an old box the night before. She looked smaller in the morning light, her bravery dulled by exhaustion. Are we in trouble? She asked quietly. Henry crouched to her level. No, he said. You're not. She studied his face carefully. You promise? Henry hesitated for half a heartbeat. Then he nodded. I promise. Later that morning, Henry made calls. Not many. Just the right ones. By noon, a sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly down the dirt road and parked near the farmhouse. A tall man stepped out. Gray-haired, broad-shouldered, his uniform worn the way Henry liked. Earned, not polished. Sheriff Donnelly, the man said, extending a hand. Long time. Henry shook it firmly. Didn't think I'd see you again. Didn't think I'd hear from you, Donnelly replied. His eyes flicked toward the farmhouse, then the fields beyond. Heard you had visitors last night. Henry nodded. Uninvited. Donnelly sighed. We've been tracking complaints like this. Developers using intimidation tactics skirting the edges of legality. Edges, Henry repeated. That's all we can prove so far, Donnelly said carefully. But your call changed the tone. How so? Donnelly lowered his voice. They didn't expect resistance, especially not from you. Henry gave a short, humorless smile. Neither did I. By mid-afternoon, word had traveled. Neighbors drove by slower than usual. Some stopped at the fence, offering quiet support. Others simply nodded, understanding without asking questions. Sarah watched it all from the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. I didn't realize people noticed us, she said. They do, Henry replied. They just don't speak until they have to. That evening, a letter arrived. No stamp. No return address, just Henry's name written neatly on the front. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of review property, subject to reassessment and compliance inspection. Henry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and set it on the table. They're starting, Sarah said. Yes, Henry replied, and they're already late. That night, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the fields, a second vehicle appeared on the road. This one didn't stop at the gate. It kept going. Henry watched from the porch, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Minutes later, his phone rang. This is as far as they go, the voice on the other end said. You won't see them again tonight. Henry nodded. Tomorrow? Tomorrow gets louder, the voice replied. But you're not alone anymore. Henry ended the call and looked back toward the house. Emily sat on the steps, watching fireflies flicker in the growing darkness. Mr. Callahan? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Are you a hero? Henry paused. No, he said. I'm just someone who stayed. Emily smiled, small and certain. That's what heroes do, she said. Henry watched the fireflies rise, and for the first time since the war, he felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Purpose. Not the kind forged by orders or duty, but the kind chosen freely. And he knew, deep down, that whatever came next, this land would not be taken quietly. Not while he was still standing. That night, Henry didn't lock the doors. Not because he felt safe, but because he wanted anyone watching to know something had changed. The house no longer felt like an isolated target. It felt occupied, alert, awake. Sarah noticed. "You're not afraid?" she asked quietly as they washed dishes together. Henry handed her a towel. "Fear doesn't leave," he said. "You just decide who it works for." She considered that. Later, after Emily was asleep, Henry spread old folders across the dining table. Yellowed documents, deeds, survey maps, letters with county seals from decades earlier. Sarah watched silently. "You've been through this before," she said. Henry nodded. Different uniforms, same pressure. He tapped a finger against one map in particular. "This land," he said, "was almost taken once, right after the war." "What happened?" "I didn't let them rush me," Henry replied. "People make mistakes when they rush." The next morning arrived with engines, not threatening ones, official ones. 2 county trucks rolled in just after 9. Clipboards, cameras, hard hats, an inspection team. Henry stood on the porch when they approached. "Mr. Callahan," the lead inspector said politely. "Routine compliance review." Henry nodded. "I was expecting you." That caught the man off guard. "You were?" Henry gestured toward the house. "Coffee's hot. Inspections go better when people are human." The inspector hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt." Inside, Emily watched from the hallway as men with serious faces walked through the farmhouse. They measured, photographed, asked questions. Henry answered calmly, precisely. When they reached the boundary near the Miller property, the lead inspector stopped. "This is interesting," he murmured. "What is?" Sarah asked. The man flipped through his papers. "The demolition order references an easement that doesn't exist anymore." Henry met his eyes. "Hasn't existed for 32 years. The inspector frowned. "Then why was it used?" Henry shrugged. "That's what I'm curious about too." Silence settled. The inspectors exchanged looks. By noon, the tone had shifted. By 2, it had reversed. The lead inspector cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, we may need to suspend further action pending review." Henry nodded once. "That would be wise." After they left, Sarah exhaled shakily. "You didn't even raise your voice," she said. Henry folded the maps carefully. "You don't fight storms," he replied. "You build roofs." That evening, a black sedan pulled up to the edge of the road. This time, only one man stepped out. No uniform, no clipboard. Just a suit too expensive for the dirt beneath his shoes. Henry watched him approach. The man stopped at the gate, smiling. "Mr. Callahan," he called. "May I speak with you?" Henry didn't move. "You already have." The man chuckled. "I admire that, truly, but we're past inspectors now." Henry studied him. Calm, clean, predatory in a quiet way. "What do you want?" Henry asked. The man spread his hands. "To make you an offer." Henry's eyes hardened. The man continued. "This land is going to change. Development is coming. You can fight it, or you can benefit." Henry glanced back at the house, at the light glowing softly from Emily's room. "No," he said. The man blinked. "You didn't hear the numbers." "I heard enough," Henry replied. The man's smile thinned. "Then you're choosing conflict." Henry stepped closer to the gate. "No," he said quietly. "You are." The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Very well." He turned back toward the sedan. As it drove away, Henry knew something with absolute certainty. The easy part was over, and the people pushing now wouldn't stop until someone broke. Henry walked back toward the farmhouse, the gravel crunching under his boots. Inside, Emily looked up at him. "Are they gone?" she asked. "For tonight," Henry said. She smiled. "Good." Henry looked at the maps one last time. They weren't just fighting for land anymore. They were fighting for something older, the right to stay. He didn't sleep much after that, not because he was afraid of the dark SUV returning, but because he finally understood what he was up against. The men who came in the night weren't impulsive. They weren't local bullies with hot tempers. They were disciplined, organized, backed by money that didn't mind spending a little to earn a lot. And money like that didn't ask politely twice. By sunrise, Henry had already made a decision. If they wanted to play a long game, he would play longer. He stood in the kitchen while Sarah poured coffee, her hands steadier than they'd been 2 days ago, though her eyes still carried the strain of someone bracing for impact. "What are we doing today?" she asked. Henry looked out the window at his fields, the fence lines, the wide open space that developers saw as profit. "We stop reacting," he said. "We start setting traps." Sarah hesitated. "Traps?" Henry turned, calm and blunt. "Legal traps, witness traps, paper traps, the kind that make powerful people nervous." Sarah stared at him, then glanced toward the hallway where Emily was still asleep. "And if that doesn't work?" Henry's face didn't change. "Then we'll still be ready." An hour later, Henry drove into town with Sarah and Emily in the truck. Emily sat between them, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly, watching the world pass by with the wary curiosity of someone who'd learned too quickly that normal days could turn dangerous. They stopped at a small diner off Main Street. The place smelled like bacon grease and coffee that had been brewing since dawn. A few older men sat in booths, hats on the table, talking quietly about crops and weather. When Henry walked in, the conversations dimmed slightly, not because he was feared, but because he was known. Some nodded respectfully. One man stood, tall, heavy-set, a farmer's shoulders, a veteran's posture. "Henry Callahan," the man said, as if the name carried weight he didn't want to misuse. "Thought you disappeared." "Almost did," Henry replied. They shook hands. The man's name was Earl McKinnon. Vietnam. Marines. Came home and built a life with his hands because his mind needed something honest to hold on to. Earl looked at Sarah, then at Emily. "This them?" he asked softly. Henry nodded. Earl's expression hardened, not angry, but focused. "Sit," he said. "Tell me." They took a booth. Henry didn't dramatize, he didn't rant. He simply laid out facts. Demolition without notice. Intimidation at night. County inspectors suddenly appearing. A suited man offering money like it was a favor. As Henry spoke, Earl's jaw tightened. "Who's behind it?" Earl asked. Henry shook his head. "Not sure yet. But we can find out." Earl leaned forward. "You want to find out? You don't ask the county. You ask the people they're afraid of." Henry stared at him. Earl continued, quieter now. "There's a lawyer in this town. Old school. Mean as a snake. Not corrupt, just allergic to bullies. You get him. You start making noise in the right places, people start sweating." Henry nodded slowly. "Name?" Earl smirked. "Walter Klein." Henry knew the name. Everyone did. Walter Klein was the kind of lawyer who didn't care who liked him because he wasn't selling friendliness. He was selling consequences. They drove straight from the diner to a narrow brick building with a worn sign that read, "Klein and Associates." Inside, the air smelled like old paper and stubbornness. A receptionist looked up, surprised, then stood a little straighter when she recognized Henry. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "It's been a long time." Henry nodded. "Walter here?" She hesitated. "He's in a mood today." Henry's eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell him it's Henry." The woman disappeared into the back. A moment later, a voice barked from behind a door. "Henry Callahan better not be here to waste my time." Henry opened the door and stepped in. Walter Klein sat behind a desk cluttered with files, glasses low on his nose, hair white and wild, like he'd been arguing with the universe since birth. He looked up, and for a second he didn't speak. Then he stood slowly. "You old son of a..." Walter muttered, then shook his head. Sit. Henry sat. Walter's eyes flicked toward Sarah and Emily waiting in the hall. Tell me, Walter said. Henry did. Walter listened without interrupting, except for the occasional grunt, his pen tapping the desk when something didn't add up. When Henry finished, Walter leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if he could see the shape of the problem up there. This isn't random, Walter said finally. This is a coordinated squeeze. Henry nodded. That's what I thought. Walter's eyes sharpened. Good. Because if you thought it was random, you'd already be dead in the water. Henry didn't flinch. Walter leaned forward again. Do you have every document related to your land? Deed, survey, taxes, old easements, everything? Henry nodded. At home. Organized. Walter's eyebrows rose slightly. Organized? Who are you and what have you done with Henry Callahan? Henry gave the faintest hint of a smile. My wife made me. Walter nodded as if that explained everything. Bring it all. Today. Henry stood. Walter pointed a finger at him. And Henry, don't talk to anyone else, not county, not developers, not men in suits. Let them talk to me. Henry paused at the door. What about the Millers? Walter's eyes softened by half a fraction. We file an emergency injunction. We demand records. We force hearings. We drag it into sunlight where cockroaches don't like to live. Henry nodded once and stepped out. As they walked back to the truck, Sarah looked overwhelmed, like she was afraid to believe they had real help. Is he on our side? She asked. Henry opened the passenger door for Emily. He's on the side of winning, Henry replied. That's close enough. Back at the farm, Walter arrived before sunset. He didn't come alone. 2 younger associates followed him, carrying boxes, laptops, portable scanners. They moved through the farmhouse like men preparing for war, setting up at the dining table, spreading papers out, turning Henry's quiet home into a command center. Emily watched from the hallway, clutching her rabbit. What are they doing? She whispered. Henry crouched beside her. They're building a shield, he said. Emily's eyes widened. Can shields stop bulldozers? Henry looked at the little girl's face, so small, so serious. Sometimes, he said softly. If you build them right. Walter worked like he was possessed. He scanned documents, highlighted dates, circled signatures, muttered under his breath about fraud, procedural violations, conflict of interest. At one point, he stopped abruptly. Henry watched him carefully. What is it? Walter held up a document Henry hadn't seen in years. An old county memo from the early 90s. This, Walter said, tapping the paper, is your ghost. Henry frowned. What do you mean? Walter's eyes gleamed. This memo shows the county officially terminated the easement they're using to justify demolition. Terminated, recorded, filed. That means anyone claiming that easement exists is either incompetent or lying. Henry's jaw tightened. So they're lying. Walter nodded. Now we prove it. As night fell, Earl McKinnon returned to the farm along with 2 other men Henry recognized from town. They didn't look like gangsters. They looked like ordinary older men. But their eyes were sharp, their movements careful, and they carried the quiet confidence of people who'd learned discipline the hard way. Earl approached Henry on the porch. You got help? Earl asked. Henry nodded toward the dining room. Legal help. Earl nodded. Good. Because you're going to need physical eyes too. Henry glanced toward the dark field line. You think they'll come back tonight? Earl's expression was grim. Maybe not tonight, but soon, and when they do, they'll try something smarter than banging on your door. Henry stared out at the darkness. Like what? Earl lowered his voice. They'll try to make you the villain, paint you as unstable, dangerous. They'll call the cops on you, say you threatened them, say you waved a weapon. Henry's eyes narrowed, Earl continued. Or they'll provoke you into doing it. Henry exhaled slowly. Walter stepped onto the porch then, holding a folder like a weapon. "We have enough," Walter said. Henry turned. "Enough for what?" Walter smiled, cold and satisfied. "Enough to make someone panic." Walter handed Henry the folder. Inside were copies of documents, highlighted contradictions, and a drafted legal motion with bold words across the top. Emergency injunction request. Sarah's breath caught as she read over Henry's shoulder. "Does this stop them?" she asked. Walter looked at her. "It slows them," he said. "Then we hit them where it hurts." "And where's that?" Henry asked. Walter's eyes locked onto his. "Publicly," Walter said. "And financially." Henry stared at the house, at the torn remains of Sarah's home visible in the distance, and at the little girl who had run to him like he was the last solid thing in the world. He nodded. "Then we do it," Henry said. Walter smiled wider. "Good," he replied, "because tomorrow we make them regret they ever learned your name." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch chimes softly, and somewhere beyond the fields, in a place Henry couldn't see, someone was watching the farmhouse light burn late into the night, realizing the old veteran wasn't just sheltering a mother and child. He was organizing. He was preparing. He was waking up. And that was the one thing they hadn't planned for. At sunrise, the farm no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a position. Cars were parked along the fence line now. Earl's truck, another belonging to one of the men who had come the night before, and Walter's sedan, already dusty from the road. The dining room lights were still on. Coffee cups lined the table beside stacks of paper, laptops humming softly like restrained engines. Henry stood outside, looking over the fields. He wasn't waiting for them to arrive. He was waiting for the first move. Inside, Walter paced as he spoke into his phone, his voice sharp and controlled. "Yes, Judge Holloway. This is Walter Klein. Yes, I know it's short notice. Because if we wait, someone's house gets erased before due process has a chance to breathe." He listened, jaw clenched. "Yes. Yes. Thank you." He ended the call and turned to Henry. "Injunction hearing is set for this afternoon," Walter said. "Emergency status. They'll fight it, but they won't ignore it." Henry nodded. "Good." Sarah stood near the doorway, Emily beside her, holding the rabbit like a talisman. "Does that mean they have to stop?" Sarah asked. "For now," Walter replied, "which is exactly when they'll panic." And right on cue, Henry's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Henry Callahan," he said. The voice on the other end was the same one from the night before. Calm. Polished. "You're moving faster than expected," the man said. Henry leaned against the porch rail. "You came to my house at 1 a.m. You don't get to be surprised." A pause. "You don't understand the scale of what you're disrupting," the man replied. "This project doesn't stop because of one injunction." Henry glanced toward the fields, the fence, the farmhouse. "It stops right here," he said. The man sighed. "We don't want to hurt anyone, especially not a child." Henry's hand tightened around the phone. "You threaten a child again," he said quietly, "and this conversation changes." Silence. Then the man spoke again, slower now. "You're forcing us into corners, Mr. Callahan." Henry's voice was steady. "That's where the truth shows." The call ended. Inside, Walter raised an eyebrow. "They reach out?" "Yes." Walter nodded. "Good. Means they're nervous." By mid-morning, county vehicles appeared again, but this time, they stayed on the road. No machines, no hard hats, just men watching. Earl stood near the fence, arms crossed. "They're counting," he muttered, "seeing who shows up." Henry watched too, and people did show up. Neighbors, farmers, a retired teacher, a mechanic from town. Men and women who had lived on this land long enough to know what it meant to lose it. No signs, no chance, just presence. Sarah watched them arrive, one by one. They're here for you, she said softly. Henry shook his head. They're here for themselves. I'm just the excuse. At noon, Walter gathered everyone inside. The injunction hearing will be quick, he said, but it won't be quiet. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, smelled faintly of old paper and stale air. Henry sat beside Walter, hands folded calmly. Sarah and Emily sat behind them. Across the room, 3 men in suits whispered to one another. One of them was the same man who had stood at Henry's gate. He didn't smile now. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Walter spoke first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He presented facts, dates, records, contradictions, the terminated easement, the lack of notice, the intimidation. Then he paused. And finally, Walter said, the attempted use of force against a family, followed by coercive behavior against a neighboring landowner who provided shelter. The judge looked up sharply. Coercive behavior? Walter nodded. Late-night visits, threats, implied harm, all documented. The men across the room stiffened. One of them stood. Your Honor, these allegations are— Sit down, the judge said flatly. Silence followed. The judge leaned back, studying the papers. I'm granting the injunction, he said. Effective immediately. No demolition, no enforcement, no action on these properties until a full review is conducted. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Emily squeezed her rabbit tighter. The suited men exchanged looks, tight, furious, controlled. The judge continued, and I am ordering an investigation into the conduct of all parties involved. The gavel struck. It was over. For now. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Local news. A regional outlet. Someone had tipped them off. The suited man approached Henry as they exited. This isn't finished, he said under his breath. Henry stopped, turned, looked at him fully for the first time. You're right, Henry said. It isn't. The man sneered. You think you've won? Henry shook his head. No. Then what do you think? Henry's eyes were calm, clear. I think you've lost control. The man stared at him, searching for weakness. He didn't find it. That evening, they returned to the farm. The fields glowed gold under the setting sun. The damaged house stood silent, wounded, but still standing. Sarah walked toward it slowly, Emily at her side. They stopped, Emily whispered. Henry knelt beside her. Yes, forever? Henry considered the question. Nothing's forever, he said, but some things last long enough to matter. That night, Henry stood alone by the fence, watching the horizon darken. Walter joined him, hands in his pockets. They'll regroup, Walter said. Try quieter routes, buy influence, bury you in paperwork. Henry nodded. Let them. Walter glanced at him. You know what scares them most? Henry didn't answer. Walter smiled thinly. You don't want anything from them. No money, no deal, no escape. Henry looked back toward the farmhouse where light spilled from the windows and a child laughed softly inside. I already have what I want, he said. The wind moved through the fields again, and far away, somewhere behind closed doors and glowing screens, men who were used to winning stared at numbers, headlines, and court orders, realizing the old veteran hadn't just delayed them. He had changed the game, and the next move would decide who paid the price. By the third morning, the pressure shifted, not away from the farm, toward it. Henry felt it before he saw it, the way silence thickened, the way the road stayed empty longer than usual, the way the birds seemed to scatter all at once, as if something unseen had crossed a line. Walter arrived early, his usual sharp energy muted by something heavier. They're bleeding, he said as soon as he stepped out of his car. Henry leaned against the porch railing. Financially? Reputation, Walter replied, which is worse for people like them. Inside, the television murmured quietly. A local news segment replayed footage from the courthouse, Henry walking out beside Sarah, Emily holding her rabbit, the damaged house in the background. A headline crawled across the screen. County halts demolition after irregularities discovered. Walter watched it with satisfaction. They didn't expect daylight, he said. They expected you to sell quietly or fold privately. Henry nodded. Bullies prefer shadows. That afternoon, an envelope arrived by courier. Not threats, not notices, an offer. Walter read it aloud at the dining table. Purchase proposal, above market value, no contingencies, immediate closing. Sarah stared at the numbers. That's more than I've ever seen. Emily didn't understand the paper, but she felt the tension shift. Henry remained silent. Walter looked at him carefully. This is their pressure release. They want you gone without admitting fault. Henry finally spoke. If I sell, what happens to them? Walter hesitated. They'll wait. They always do. Then they'll come back. Henry folded the paper once, then again. No, he said. Walter nodded slowly. That's what I hoped you'd say. That evening, Henry walked the boundary of the property alone. The fence posts were old, weathered, still standing. He remembered driving these same lines years ago with his wife, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she talked about repairs he never got around to making. He remembered promises. He stopped near the Miller house, the damage frozen in time by the injunction. Boards splintered, walls torn open, but still upright, still salvageable. Behind him, footsteps approached. Sarah. I used to think a home was just walls, she said softly. Something temporary. Henry looked at the house. Walls matter, he said, but what's inside matters more. She nodded. You could walk away from this. Henry turned to her. So could you. Sarah shook her head. I don't want to anymore. That night the call came again. Different number, different tone. Mr. Callahan, the voice said, strained now. This is escalating unnecessarily. Henry sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet. It escalated when you sent men to my porch, he replied. We're prepared to sweeten the offer, the man said. Henry didn't answer. Think about the stress, the man continued. Your age, the child, the risks. Henry closed his eyes, then opened them. You mistake endurance for weakness, he said. That's a common error. The man exhaled sharply. You're making enemies. Henry's voice was calm. I already survived mine. The call ended without another word. 2 days later, the investigation widened. Emails surfaced, internal memos, county officials placed on leave, a developer named for the first time. Walter laid it all out across the dining table like pieces of a puzzle finally locking together. They cut corners, Walter said, then panicked when they got caught. And now? Sarah asked. Walter smiled thinly. Now they're looking for someone to sacrifice. That night, Emily stood beside Henry on the porch watching the stars. Are we safe now? She asked. Henry thought carefully. Safer, he said. Because people are watching. She nodded. I like when people watch. Henry smiled faintly. Me too, he said. The next morning, a truck arrived carrying lumber, not county, not corporate, neighbors, men who didn't ask permission. They worked quietly, methodically, repairing what had been torn down. No speeches, no cameras, just hands rebuilding something that had been broken. Sarah cried openly this time, not from fear, but from relief. Henry stood back watching. Walter joined him. You know, Walter said, most people fight to win. Henry looked at the house taking shape again. I'm fighting so she doesn't have to, he replied. As dusk settled, Emily ran across the yard, laughter echoing for the first time since this began. Henry watched her go, then turned his gaze back to the fields. The land was still his, for now. But more importantly, something else had taken root there. something stubborn, something that didn't scare easily. And whoever had started this thought they were dealing with an old man protecting dirt. They were wrong. He was protecting a line, and once a line is defended long enough, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes history. The final hearing took place on a gray Thursday morning. Not dramatic, not loud, just inevitable. Henry sat in the same wooden courtroom, hands folded, posture calm. Sarah sat beside him this time, not behind. Emily sat between them, feet dangling, her rabbit tucked under one arm. Across the room, the men in suits looked smaller than before. Not weaker. Exposed. Walter stood when called, his voice steady as stone. He didn't argue emotion. He didn't plead. He laid out timelines, paper trails, emails that contradicted sworn statements. He showed how notices were falsified, how inspections were rushed, how intimidation filled the gaps where legality failed. Then he stopped. And finally, Walter said, "We have motive." The judge looked up. Walter gestured to the screen. Maps appeared. Zoning overlays, development projections, future commercial corridors. Henry's land sat at the center of it all. The Miller property was never the prize, Walter said. It was the lever. Silence settled in the room. One of the suited men shifted in his seat. The judge leaned forward. "Is this accurate?" The man stood, face tight. "Your Honor, development requires efficiency. Sometimes—" "Sit down," the judge said sharply. The gavel didn't come down yet. The judge wasn't finished. "What concerns this court," she said, "is not ambition, but entitlement. The assumption that land, homes, and people are obstacles rather than rights." She turned her gaze to Henry. "Mr. Callahan, how long have you lived on your property?" Henry stood slowly. 48 years, he said. "I buried my wife there. I raised my son there. I paid every tax they sent me." The judge nodded. She looked at Sarah. "Ms. Miller?" Sarah stood, voice steady despite the weight of the room. "My husband built our home with his hands," she said. "They tried to erase it in one morning." Emily tugged gently at Sarah's sleeve. The judge noticed. "What is your name?" she asked softly. Emily swallowed. "Emily." "And why are you here today, Emily?" Emily thought for a moment. "Because this is our house," she said, "and houses shouldn't be taken when people are inside." The room went still. The judge exhaled slowly. Then she spoke. "This court finds substantial evidence of misconduct, coercion, and abuse of process," she said. "All demolition orders are permanently void. All related claims are dismissed." A murmur rippled through the room. She continued, "I am referring this matter for criminal investigation and civil penalties." The gavel came down. Once. It was over. Outside, reporters waited again. This time Henry didn't stop. He didn't need to. The story would tell itself. Back at the farm, the air felt lighter. Neighbors gathered quietly. Someone brought food. Someone else brought coffee. No speeches. No celebration. Just relief moving from person to person like warmth. Walter stood beside Henry near the fence. "They'll pay," Walter said. "Financially, publicly, privately." Henry nodded. "That's enough." Walter studied him. "You could have sold, walked away rich." Henry looked toward the rebuilt house where Emily stood in the doorway, waving at someone across the yard. "I didn't fight for money," he said. "I fought for quiet." Walter smiled. "You got it." That evening the sun dipped low, painting the fields gold. Sarah sat on the porch steps beside Henry. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Henry shook his head. "You already did. You stayed." Emily ran up and climbed onto the step between them. "Are they gone forever?" she asked. Henry smiled gently. "They won't bother you again," he said. She nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. "I like it here." Later, after the lights dimmed and the house grew still, Henry walked the land one last time before night fully settled. The fence held. The ground was firm. The farmhouse behind him glowed softly, no longer lonely. Henry stopped at the edge of the field and looked up at the stars. He thought about the wars he'd fought, the ones with guns, the ones with silence, and the one that mattered most, the one where he stayed. Some battles aren't about winning. They're about drawing a line and refusing to move. And sometimes when you stand long enough, the world shifts instead. Henry Callahan turned back toward the house, toward the light, toward the quiet he had earned. And behind him, the land remained, unbroken, unclaimed, and finally, at peace.